Did Israel just conquer Iran? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Steve Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, we're going to talk about what's going on in Syria with the realization that the passing minutes might make any particular thing we say obsolete. But a couple of things that I'd like to raise with you guys and just get your thoughts on these. Number one is I noticed in a story that I read that what happened in Syria is part of a larger story with after the attack on October 7th, where Hamas attacked Israel, and then Israel's overwhelming response to that during the past year or so, and Hamas has been basically, neutered and hiding in holes, those who remain. And then Israel goes and takes out the top leaders of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and was also struck some things in Iran. And the real loser in the so-called revolution that's happening in Syria right now, Steve Green, in addition to Russia, seems to be Iran. Their whole strategy was to have sort of these outposts of militias and ability to project force elsewhere that would keep war away from their own soil. And now they've basically lost Hamas, they've lost Hezbollah, and they've lost the Assad regime in 12 days. Steve, it seems like everybody in the world was blindsided, including Russia and Iran, by this sudden move by the rebels. Everybody was surprised, except perhaps Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, who is the leader of this group, which we'll never learn to pronounce, called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Yeah, so we all shorten it to HTS. Yeah. But here's a guy who's apparently spent some time in, I think it was Abu Ghraib, has spent some time in U.S. prisons and was previously tightly aligned with al-Qaeda and ISIS, but has since then distanced himself from them. Steve, we can't really, I don't think, make predictions about what's going to happen now. No. But what really, I think, what struck me was, first of all, the utter element of surprise and rapidity with which this all happened in Syria. And secondly, the way everything seems to be going, the way Israel needs it to go right now, even though, as I speak, Benjamin Netanyahu testified today in his own corruption trial in Israel. This may be one of the better days of his long public service in Israel.
Yeah, and it's quite a comeback for Netanyahu, and I don't mean politically. What I mean is the terror invasion of October 7 last year was a huge intelligence failure, and it happened on Netanyahu's watch. And he's made good on that. And he's done it despite some very heavy pressure from the Biden administration to not do many things that he's needed to do that has resulted in what is going to be a positive outcome for Israel. I don't know what's going to happen in Syria. I have the feeling the results may be even worse than Assad, which is saying something. I'm still not sorry to see him go. He's one of the genuine bad guys in the world. You find out what's going on in his secret prison. There are levels in that secret prison that the rebels are calling on engineers from anywhere in the world to help them break into this prison that they've already taken hold of, because there are levels that they can't get into. They're so well secured, and there are people down there, political prisoners, women, children down there. It's a madhouse. Apparently something like 30,000 executions have taken place in this prison in the last 10 or 12 years. But I want to get back to your original point. So when I talk about Iran, I don't mean the people of Iran, who have been truly sick of their government for years and years and years, and they had a chance to overthrow them in 2009. All they needed was just some moral support from then President Barack Obama, who didn't provide it. Yep. And the rest is, as they say, is history. So nothing I say is any insult to the people of Iran. I mean, just their government. Iran's ambitions in the Middle East, Scott, it's more than just their little militia and terrorist outpost. It's imperial. It really goes back to restoring the Persian Empire. Xerxes, Darius, whichever one of these guys you want to talk about, just a lot more territory for them. And they've had a lot of success. One of the worst outcomes of our misadventure in Iraq was opening up that country to Iran. And Syria the same. When the Syrian civil war started in 2011 now. You say that the regime fell in 11 days. It's been almost 14 years and 11 days. And one of the reasons the regime has lasted so long is that Barack Obama, through his pursuit of a nuclear deal with Iran, opened up the floodgates of money to Tehran. Tehran used a lot of that money to prop up the Assad regime. And when things started getting really bad in 2015 in the Syrian civil war, Barack Obama, again, that son of a bitch, Barack Obama dealt the Russians in, and he gave not half the country, he gave Russia entry to Syria, which then became their way of projecting power into the Mediterranean and into Africa. And if you haven't read some of the stories about what Russia is getting up to in the mineral-rich parts of Africa, they'll curdle your blood. And that was all made possible by Barack Obama. So you have Syria as a client state of Russia and Iran using Syria. Tehran used Syria to funnel weapons to Hezbollah. So not only has Hezbollah lost so much of their leadership to exploding pagers and targeted assassinations and bombings and all the rest, well done, Israel, but they've also now lost their conduit of weapons and cash through Syria. This is a very big deal. And I have commenters over at Vodka Pundit ask me, well, Syria is just going to be run by this new group of terrorists. They'll cooperate with Iran. Oh, no. You don't understand the amount of hate that the Syrian rebels have for Iran for keeping the Assad regime alive for so long, for these last 13, 14 years. That level of hate, and this is a region with long memories, they are not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything for Tehran. In fact, if they can kill more Iranians, that'll just make them all the happier. So what we've seen is, except in Yemen, where the Houthis are still well supplied, Iran's imperial ambitions have been very much cut off through the Levant. This is big news. It makes Israel safer. It puts Iran partway back in the box that President Trump had them in during his term. And I can't wait to see what happens now that President-elect Trump is going to have a chance to put those sanctions back on Iran.
Bill, in a sense, the Assad regime has really been something like 54 years because Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's daddy, was in charge there for many decades. And so this country has been suffering for decades and decades under these terrible people. And now the citizens of Iran are drop-kicking the heads of Hafez Assad statues around the capital in Damascus. Bill, Israel took advantage of the moment when the rebels, the HTS rebels, came into Damascus to quickly dispatch some missile facilities in Syria that were a threat to Israel, some chemical weapons facilities that had previously been used in Syria from, as we remember Barack Obama's famous red line that if Bashar Assad would cross that by using chemical weapons, well, he crossed it with impunity. But Israel didn't want to see anything like that happen to anybody again, and they took care of that. As you pointed out, Bill, the United States rapidly went on a bombing campaign of some ISIS sites where they thought that they were trying to reassemble and take advantage of the moment themselves. And it just, it reminds me of the rapidity of this, reminds me of how quickly ISIS collapsed and how before that, everybody was basically saying, well, what can you do? They're in charge. They're big shots. They're terrorists. They're dictators. They're whatever. And the whole world kind of sat on the sidelines wringing their hands. And then, this guy leads 25,000 troops, which is a pittance, leads 25,000 troops, takes Aleppo, takes Homs, takes Damascus, and the dictator flees to Russia, where he is probably living in a dacha in comfort with all the money that he stole from his people. How is it, Bill? You're a student of world history. How is it that the so-called experts and geostrategic czars around the world are wrong so often and so dramatically?
I think it's because ultimately they're moral cowards. They are the kind of people that look at the capabilities of our adversaries and assume that we have no capabilities ourselves. They're the kind of people that look at aggression on the part of our adversaries and react with this kind of, oh my God, we gotta be careful of these people, without understanding who the big dog really is, and who the little dog is as well. I might point out in this particular scenario. The Middle East has, since World War II, been the source of just endless agony. And since 1979, all roads of agony and pain and death and misery lead to Tehran.
Yeah.
All of them lead to Tehran. Tehran declared war on the United States, on Israel, and everybody else in 1979 during the Islamic Revolution. We didn't take it seriously. We still haven't taken it seriously. Donald Trump took it more seriously than any president since then, but even Ronald Reagan, with the bombings in Lebanon and the pullout there and so on, we haven't understood that this country, which is technologically advanced country and has a solid scientific and military program, Iran, has been at war with the West since 1979 because of their fundamentalist Islamic republic. What we're seeing, Scott, is the ultimate example of F around and find out. I mean, that's really what it came down to. In October of 2023, Iran decided to F around and find out. They got their money back from the Biden administration, and they launched this horrific attack against Israel, which was designed to provoke the kind of response in Gaza that they thought would, to some degree it works. I mean, How many college campuses now are talking about free Palestine and is the genocide in Gaza and all the rest of it. So they know how the West reacts when they look at the West as weak. But what they are never able to factor in is what happens when they look at the West when the West is being led by strong and competent leaders. And I include Israel in the West here because Israel is a Western country in the heart of this Asiatic empire. So yes, the situation has been catastrophic for Iran, and now the time, in my opinion, is to close the deal, and that means getting rid of the mullahs in Iran. When people hear me say things like this, oh, you're advocating foreign wars. I'm not advocating foreign wars. I don't want to see a single boot on the ground. I wouldn't mind seeing a widespread coalition that simply decided that this thorn in the side of the entire planet, which also, by the way, supplies nuclear materials with North Korea, the North Korea, Pakistan, Iran, Russia axis, China occasionally chipping in. They're rogue nations. And these rogue nations have been allowed to be rogue nations and cause endless murder, misery, and terror for 50, 60 years now, and we have not been able to put a stop to it because we haven't been willing to face the fact that we have been at war since 1979, and it's about time we woke up to this fact. Donald Trump has made some noises along this line, but what many people don't realize, one of the events that you left out in your extremely comprehensive review of what's happened since that terror, as Steve's term, I've never heard it before, terror attack, a terror invasion rather, is that we had the largest air-to-air engagement in the history of the United States Air Force since World War II. Back in September when Iran launched that massive missile attack against Israel. They launched nearly 1,000 weapons, including hundreds and hundreds of slow-flying drones. Six landed in Israel. And a large percentage of the ones that were shot down by American F-15s that were scrambling as the drones were flying over the base. We recently saw some awards for heroism for American ground crews and F-15 crews who were told to go into bunkers in their airbase because there was shrapnel flying everywhere. And they stayed out and refueled these F-15s and put them in the air again and again. These guys would go up, they'd fire all their missiles, they'd shoot out all their guns at these drones. They'd come back and they'd refuel them, rearm them, get them up in the air again. We shot down hundreds of these things that were determined to go and kill Israelis. So Iran has failed, and I mean massively failed, everywhere, including with the Houthis, who we need to include into this equation of world disruption on the part of these Islamic lunatics that don't represent the people of Iran. That does need to be stated repeatedly. This is a repressive regime that supports other repressive regimes, and we've been dicking around the margins by dealing with ISIS and Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, and we've been dealing with the Assad regime in Syria, when what we should have been doing this whole time is been dealing with the center of this web of tentacles, and that is the Iranian leadership. I think that one thing that we can look forward to all people can look forward to, whether there's a definitive strike on Iran or not. What I think all people can look forward to is, it seems clear from what you said and the events in Syria and everything else, that Iran has essentially shot its bolt. It has done everything it could with Hamas and lost, everything it could do with Hezbollah and lost, everything it could do with the Houthis and lost, launched all of its drones and missile attacks against Israel and lost, backed the Syrian regime and lost. And now the president incoming, who had nearly put together a peace deal for the entire region when Iran was much stronger than they are today, I think has a chance to go in there, put together a region-wide coalition that is designed to do nothing but to contain and eliminate this Iranian regime, and hopefully they'll be able to do it through sanctions and diplomacy. That would certainly be my route of choice. You squeeze Iran hard enough, and the people of Iran will rise up. And I suspect that if we do see another uprising in Iran, as Steve pointed out in 2009, this time they're going to get more than just the cold shoulder from the President of the United States. They're going to get the support not only of American people, but people of goodwill around the world, and get rid of this toxic, cancerous, aggressive, merciless, cruel regime that has done so much damage to the world since 1979 and is way, way, way past its sell date.
Well, as many people know, Bashar al-Assad and Hafez al-Assad were not really, the last name wasn't really al-Assad. That was a name that they took on to replace their original last name, and they took it on because it meant the lion, Lion. And I think what we may be finding out in these last 2 weeks is that the leaders of Iran may turn out to be the tiger of the paper kind. And right now, this is an incredibly strategic moment in geopolitics, and it calls for nuance, but it also calls for courage. We don't know much about what this HTS group has in mind. We do know that they are releasing statements such as this, which came out of their official spokesperson said, Muslims and Christians, meaning in Syria, in all their diversity will be respected. This was pointed out in a newspaper article I read where the newspaper reporter seemed to miss the fact that they pointedly did not mention the Jews. They just said Muslims and Christians in all their diversity will be respected. I would just say to anybody in that movement, in that HTS group, those so-called rebels, need to understand that there are a lot of Americans who worship a Jewish Messiah and who have been praying for many years for the peace of Jerusalem and who are willing to stand in defense of that country and of those people. And so we find in them a deep brotherhood that transcends geopolitics. But this is a moment I think we're going to look back on and with almost a marveling, as if it were a miracle. But who would have said a year ago, when Netanyahu's government seemed to totter, and the bungling of the failure of intelligence that led to the Hamas invasion from Gaza into Israel, and now we see a position where Hamas is hiding, Hezbollah is beheaded, Syria has fled, the regime in Syria has fled, and Iran, which had been funding it all, is now in a situation where it has completely lost. It's not just that it's lost all these militias, it lost its entire strategy. its entire resistance strategy, so-called, that they had out there to build this fence out there, the fence is down. They are vulnerable. And there are people in Iran right now, in homes, there are husbands and wives having whispered conversations about, you think this could happen here? I mean, who would have thought that it could happen in 12 days in Syria? Is it possible that these mullahs aren't who we think they are? That that the soldiers who were supposedly so loyal to the regime here aren't as loyal as we think they are? That they will lay down their weapons and run away, as so many did in the face of a mere 25,000 rebel troops who just rapidly moved from town to town? They are endeavoring right now. Jalani's forces have already appointed an interim president. They are not engaging in de-Baathification, so-called, like they did in Iraq after the war. They are actually inviting people who were not openly fighting against them to remain in their government roles. They are encouraging police to return to work. They are trying to find fuel so that buses can run. They're trying to find ways to get supplies back in so businesses can open and so that prices can come down. So they seem to be making all the kinds of moves that you would make if you intended to have a somewhat democratic form of government. And they are also overtly saying that they're not interested in imposing dress codes on women. In fact, one of their spokespersons was a woman. And so there are a lot of positive signs here. And Mr. Jalani has an opportunity that is extraordinary in history. And he can choose either to go the way of his fanatical ancestors and completely screw this up and cause the slaughter of tens of thousands of people, or he can choose another path and be welcomed into the brotherhood of nations, so to speak, and be part of remaking the Middle East from a constant boiling cauldron of dissension into a place where the desert blooms. And let's pray that he moves in that direction. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. This is Right Angle. We thank the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.